Hello everybody, and welcome back to Cam Critiques. I've long been a fan of 2D platformers, especially indie games. I adore games like Shovel Knight, Celeste, Spelunky, and The Messenger, so I was quite excited for Cyber Shadow. It seemed to have a lot of potential, boasting great pixel art, fun-looking movement, and even the blessings of Yacht Club Games, a studio that knows what it's talking about when it comes to the genre. However, I'm here to sadly report that Cyber Shadow is a massive disappointment that falls short on multiple levels. Let's talk a little more about where exactly Cyber Shadow goes so wrong by first looking at the gameplay. Cyber Shadow is a precision platformer structured very similarly to old school platformers like Mega Man and Ninja Gaiden. You go through 10 different levels in a linear fashion, unlocking new abilities and facing tons of enemies along the way. This is a great structure, it's been proven to work time and time again. So the game has a good structure, the movement looked really fun, the pixel art looked neat, everything looked right. I thought it'd be pretty hard for the developer to mess it up. But Cyber Shadow really surprised me with just how bad it was able to be, given all the great things that surrounded it. Cyber Shadow is a tough game where you can really only succeed if you master each and every one of the 7 abilities you collect throughout it. Abilities like throwing shurikens, dashing, and upward slashes. Now I want you to guess how many buttons these 7 abilities are spread over. 4? 2? Surely not 1, right? Well yeah, it's not 1. It's actually 0. That's right, each and every one of these 7 abilities is controlled with the D-pad alone. I don't think I have to explain much about why this is bad. Switching between all your different maneuvers is a nightmare. Accidentally inputting a move and wasting your limited energy is extremely common. There are so many buttons left unused. X, every trigger, the whole right stick. Hopefully more control options can be patched in the future, but as it stands, Cyber Shadow has one of the most unpleasant, awkward control schemes I've ever had the displeasure of putting to use. Subpar movement is probably the most prevalent killer of 2D platformers out there. I imagine getting the feeling of moving through a 2D game world down is quite difficult and requires lots of trial and error, but it's really a necessity. Cyber Shadow does a good job of showing exactly why. You see, at first Cyber Shadow doesn't feel too bad. It's a little slow, but walking and attacking feel responsive and natural enough. However, then you unlock the dash. From then on, many of the levels are built around this dash. Many jumps are designed around using it, and one of the most vital attacks you have, an air slash of sorts, only works if you're dashing forward. Now I will admit, I don't know enough about game development to say exactly why it feels the way it does. All I do know is that the dash feels horribly wrong. The movement speed feels off, the jumping distance feels off, even the animations look kind of off. And even if the dashing felt fine, it did still have a fatal flaw. Dashing is activated by double tapping the D-pad in a direction. That's right, your most useful, vital movement mechanic is tied to an input that is often not picked up correctly, an input that can't even be pressed immediately. Most of my deaths in Cyber Shadow came about because I double tapped to start dashing, but it wouldn't register properly, and I'd end up not jumping far enough and falling to my doom. I later learned that, despite never telling you this in the game, you actually can dash with the right bumper. One problem though, holding it doesn't keep it active. If the dash ever stops so you have to say turn around to hit an enemy, or stop pressing forward to land on a small platform mid-jump, it won't start again until you let go of the bumper and then press the bumper down again. So even still, dashing is cumbersome and frustrating. Movement is the one thing that I was really hoping Cyber Shadow would nail. The trailers looked great, but I'm sad to report that even the most basic movement options, beyond simply walking, are riddled with flaws. Even if the movement felt amazing though, there would still be a big issue surrounding it. It takes far too long for you to unlock all of your abilities. When you first start out, you're capable of very few things. You can pretty much only walk slowly and sling your sword out in one direction, right in front of you. And the first few abilities you unlock don't really help. You get stuff like a shuriken that's very rarely useful, and that consumes your limited energy. Or an upward slash that is even more rarely useful, that also consumes your limited energy. You literally don't unlock the ability to run until halfway through the game. This really holds the level design back too. Of course the game has limited obstacle variety and gets repetitive quickly, when half of it is designed entirely around only walking and jumping. I want to go back to the limited energy I've mentioned throughout this section. It is frankly a system that has no reason to exist other than to annoy you. To use the abilities you unlock throughout the game, you must spend a skill point. These do not charge over time. They don't even refill when you die. You can either spend the game's coin equivalent, which also has practically no reason to exist. I had hundreds of extras at the end of the game and maybe spent 200 total, to refill it at some checkpoints. Or you can kill enemies and break crates until something to refill it drops. Even if you go out of your way to 100% complete the game and get every upgrade, the SP count maxes out at 15. I understand that they implemented this system so you couldn't just shred through bosses by spamming your special moves. However, there have to be better solutions out there. What the system really does, most of the time, is just prevent you from having fun in the platforming sections that make it the majority of the game. It's not like it's a resource you have to worry about managing, as refills you out from pretty much anything. It just stops you from chaining together moves in interesting ways, and sometimes makes you waste a minute or two breaking crates and enemies until some extra is dropped. It mostly serves to kill the pacing and kill the fun. At the very least, core movement abilities like the air dash really shouldn't be tied to this limited resource. I will say though, the boss fights in this game are pretty great, and the core enemies aren't bad either. New goons are constantly introduced throughout, and the variety of different ways in which you have to dodge their attacks and land blows is pretty impressive. They do look bland though, and by the end fighting them gets pretty repetitive as enemies from level 1 are still on level 10. The bosses though do not have either of these problems. There are a good deal of them, and they are definitely the highlight of the game. They all have interesting, colorful, unique designs. They all have wildly different methods of attack and attack patterns. They even have a large variety of boss arenas, and they offer a great challenge. They're mostly just the right level of difficulty, though the final boss is a bit frustrating as it has 3 phases with no checkpoints. I can only imagine how fun they'd be with more interesting combat and better movement. The combat really is quite dull. Aside from your special attacks that you'll probably avoid using because doing so eats up the limited resource that allows the game's movement to be at all enjoyable, you have one sword slash. No combos, no different directions, no angles. You just stick it out in front of you. It gets boring fast, and it doesn't change at all throughout the entire game. I just wish it had literally anything to make it interesting, seeing as the level design and movement both fall flat themselves. Now I want to talk about the difficulty. I'm a fan of difficult platformers, but I can't say I enjoy the difficulty in this game. This game is hard, but there weren't any challenging, unique jumps or anything like that. There were just a lack of checkpoints and a very limited amount of health. As I said before, most of the deaths I faced felt like they were a result of the poor controls more than anything else, especially with how the dash works, and the punishment for death was just doing the same boring section over again. Cyber Shadow is hard, but not in the right way outside of the boss fights. So yeah, the gameplay in Cyber Shadow kinda sucks. The combat, the level design, and the movement, the 3 core parts of the gameplay, all fall flat. Throw on needlessly frustrating difficulty and pointless and obnoxious mechanics like limited SP, and you've got a game that's just flat out not fun. The bosses and some of the enemies are good in concept, and they would be good in execution if the game played well, but that's really all it has going for it. I'm giving the gameplay of Cyber Shadow a 3 out of 10. Now, let's move on to talking about the story and characters of Cyber Shadow. This section won't be too long, as this game is far more focused on gameplay rather than story. But I do have a few things to say. Sadly, none of them are good. Cyber Shadow's story is derivative and boring, and it's told in a really obnoxious way. Cyber Shadow tells of a ninja turned cyborg fighting to save his clan leader from an evil organization. That is really all there is to it. There are a few forgettable side characters thrown in here and there, but the core of the plot is truly that simple. The concept is cool, but I was just never interested in anything that was happening in the story. It's too shallow and unoriginal. And worst of all, it pops up everywhere. All throughout the levels, you'll find data logs and journals and whatnot to read. And you'll get the occasional cutscene as well. But all of it is meaningless. They never have anything interesting to say, and they mostly don't even really add to the core plot. The cutscenes have almost no motion at all, and are more like walls of text. And the other things are literally just walls of text. I probably spent half an hour reading dialogue in this game, and I gained nothing from it. I didn't learn anything that enhanced the plot past the first couple of sentences. I didn't read anything that introduced any new themes. I didn't read anything that tried to be funny. I just wasted my time reading tons of meaningless filler. Speaking of meaningless filler, let's talk about basically every character. I will be honest, I cannot name a single one other than the main character. They are also one note and, well, boring. Like I said, the concept is neat, so I can't say the story is all bad. And you can even skip the boring data logs and whatnot if you want to. In fact, I'm going to say that if you play this game, you should skip them. You should skip every optional NPC conversation as well. There's nothing of value to be gained. I'm giving the story and characters of Cyber Shadow a 3 out of 10. Now, let's talk about the visuals and sound. I thought that, if all else failed, at least this game would have cool pixel art. And don't get me wrong, it definitely does. It's a great style that accurately captures the vibe of the NES, despite it having far more detailed sprites and animations than the NES ever did. However, I cannot say this game looks good. I want to, but the visuals have a massive fatal flaw. The environments are so boring and bland. They're all basically just minor color swaps of very generic platformer levels. and sometimes the colors aren't even different. Take a look at these 4 pictures. These are all from the same stage, right? Nope. They actually represent the visual style of 4 different chapters out of the 10 total. That's right, 40% of the game's areas use one blue color scheme. Imagine if in a Mario game, every level had an underground theme. Or if in a Sonic game, every level used the same tile set from Green Hill Zone. Those are great level themes, but doesn't that still sound pretty miserable? Now imagine if in a Sonic game, every level looked like Marble Zone. That's basically what Cyber Shadow has. The whole game is only about 5 hours long, but I think it had more than enough ugly, bland, off-blue environments for a lifetime. Now let's talk about the character design in Cyber Shadow. The main character, Shadow, looks pretty cool, especially in the key art, and the bosses mostly look interesting too. I don't want to spoil too much about them, but just take a look at some of these guys. However, the enemies are pretty generic, and the other side characters are really generic. The standard enemies are pretty much just barely stylized hunks of metal, and they leave no lasting impression. Some of the side characters technically left an impression, but only because of how shockingly uninteresting they were. None of them look like they should have a role that involves any conversation of any kind, yet some of them play key roles in the story. Just take a look at the leader of the clan, the person who drives the plot, arguably the most important character in the game. That's it? You could tell me that was a background character in some crowd somewhere, and I would totally believe you. Most of the characters and enemies in this game just fail to leave any impression at all. Speaking of things that leave no impression, I want to briefly mention the sound effects. I'm going to be honest, I hardly remember a single one. They're just so flat. As it stands, they don't do nearly as much to enhance the excitement of the gameplay as they should. Swinging a sword needs to sound cool and satisfying, and it just doesn't here. Now let's finally talk about the music. As I'm sure some of you have noticed, I've actually been playing music from The Messenger, a fantastic Ninja Gaiden throwback game, rather than Cyber Shadow throughout most of this review. Normally I like to play music more relevant to the topic I'm discussing in the video, but there frankly wasn't enough decent music to choose from. By the end of this game, I was playing my own music in the background because I didn't think I could stay awake through another bland, uninspired melody while already dealing with bland, uninspired visuals and gameplay. Yet again, I had high hopes in this department. A lot of great platformers like The Messenger, as you've heard in this video, Celeste, and Shovel Knight have amazing soundtracks. But this is just another area in Cyber Shadow where I was let down. Believe me, if I believed there was enough interesting music in the game for this video, I would have played it. But I didn't want to bore all of you watching this video that terribly. The visuals and sound of Cyber Shadow are ultimately pretty rough. Half of the character designs are neat, and the overall art style is pretty nice. But those are the only good things I can say. The sound effects, the music, the level designs, the other half of the character designs are all just dreadfully boring. At least they're not bad like the gameplay is, but they're far from good. So I have to give Cyber Shadow's visuals and sound a 5 out of 10. In conclusion, I don't believe you should waste your time with Cyber Shadow. It's largely not fun. It's not pretty, it doesn't sound good, it's not interesting, it excels at nothing and fails in more than a few places. I've played much worse, and I'm still interested to see Mecha Skull's future projects. Making a whole game like this by yourself is truly impressive, and it clearly resonated with some people based on other reviews. But I'm here today to tell you my thoughts. And my thoughts are that this game deserves a 4 out of 10. Thank you guys for watching this video, I really appreciate it. If you liked it, I'd really appreciate it if you liked, commented, hit the notification bell, and or subscribed. I'd also recommend you check out some of my other content, like my video on why I believe the Wii U is better than the Nintendo Switch. If you want to see additional updates about the channel, follow me on Twitter or Instagram, or join my Discord server, all linked in the description below. Thank you all for watching, have a great rest of your day.